It was early spring in Texas. The kind of morning where the sun stretches out a little longer across the fields, and even the wind feels like it's carrying stories. I was standing by the window, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee I hadn't tasted in over an hour, staring out at the quiet road that led to the cemetery. James had passed 3 days earlier. 51 years, 5 months, and 2 days of marriage, and just like that, he was gone. We weren't perfect, no one ever is, but we were solid. Reliable. He made the coffee every morning. I folded the laundry. We took walks after dinner. We argued sometimes, sure, but never about anything that couldn't be solved by bedtime. You build a life like that with someone, and when they leave, the silence they leave behind gets loud. Loud in strange ways. I remember that morning because I was more afraid of the funeral than I was of the grief. I was afraid of the people. Afraid of the looks. Afraid of what my own son might say. Because families don't always break with a bang. Sometimes, they crack quietly over years. And you don't even know it's broken until someone tries to stand on it. David, our only child, hadn't visited much in the last decade. Not since he got promoted and moved to Dallas with his wife, Clara. He called on birthdays. Sent Christmas cards with pictures of their 2 girls. The girls I'd only met twice. And even then, it felt like an appointment squeezed between other, more important things. But I still set the good plates. I still made the pie he liked as a boy. I still hoped. James used to say, give him time. The world pulls hard on young men. I believed him. Maybe because I wanted to. Maybe because I needed to. But the week leading up to the funeral, something gnawed at me. A feeling. A deep one. The kind you don't admit out loud because even saying it makes it more real. I thought maybe David wouldn't come at all. But he did. He showed up the night before the service, just as I was folding the last of James's favorite ties. He didn't knock. Just walked in with Clara behind him and the 2 girls who barely looked up from their phones. Hey, Mom, he said, not quite making eye contact. We're staying at a hotel near the church. No hug. No flowers. No, how are you holding up? I nodded. That's fine. Clara gave me a thin smile, the kind you use when you're being polite but not present. The girls said nothing. I offered dinner. They declined. I asked if they wanted to see the photo board I made of James's life. Clara said they were tired from the drive. I sat alone that night, staring at James's empty recliner, wondering what it would have been like if David had married someone else. Or if we had raised him differently. Or if, well, wondering doesn't bring anyone back. The day of the funeral was warm. Uncomfortably warm for April, like Texas had decided grief wasn't heavy enough. I wore James's favorite blue dress on me, the one he once said made my eyes look like the sky before a thunderstorm. I pinned his army pin to my chest. Just a little piece of him to carry into the church. James used to say, give him time. The world pulls hard on young men. I believed him. Maybe because I wanted to. Maybe because I needed to. But the week leading up to the funeral, something gnawed at me. A feeling. A deep one. The kind you don't admit out loud because even saying it makes it more real. I thought maybe David wouldn't come at all. But he did. He showed up the night before the service, just as I was folding the last of James's favorite ties. He didn't knock. Just walked in with Clara behind him and the 2 girls who barely looked up from their phones. Hey, Mom, he said, not quite making eye contact. We're staying at a hotel near the church. No hug. No flowers. No, how are you holding up? I nodded. That's fine. Clara gave me a thin smile, the kind you use when you're being polite but not present. The girls said nothing. I offered dinner. They declined. I asked if they wanted to see the photo board I made of James's life. Clara said they were tired from the drive. I sat alone that night, staring at James's empty recliner, wondering what it would have been like if David had married someone else. Or if we had raised him differently. Or if, well, wondering doesn't bring anyone back. The day of the funeral was warm. Uncomfortably warm for April, like Texas had decided grief wasn't heavy enough. I wore James's favorite blue dress on me, the one he once said made my eyes look like the sky before a thunderstorm. I pinned his army pin to my chest. Just a little piece of him to carry into the church. The service began beautifully. Our pastor, a kind man with a soft voice, spoke of James with tenderness. Friends shared stories. Old co-workers came, shaking my hand, telling me how James made the office brighter, how he never missed a birthday, how he once fixed someone's flat tire in the middle of a thunderstorm and refused to take a dime for it. I smiled. I nodded. I dabbed my eyes with the same tissue over and over again. Then the pastor said, "Now, James's son, David, would like to say a few words." And just like that, the warmth in the room shifted. David stood slowly. Smoothed his tie. Walked to the podium. He looked down at the paper in his hands for a long time. Too long. Then he looked up, and what he said wasn't what I expected. He didn't speak about James's kindness or his love of fishing or the way he used to whistle while fixing the kitchen sink. Instead, he said, "Growing up, my father was distant. Always working. Always tired. And my mother, well, my mother made sure we didn't bother him." There was a pause. The kind that echoes. The kind that makes your stomach clench without warning. I think a lot of people saw a version of my dad that I didn't, he continued. To the world, he was helpful, funny, generous. But at home, he was hard. Quiet. And Mom was the one who kept everything together. My ears rang. I couldn't tell if he meant it as a compliment or a condemnation. I watched faces turn subtly toward me, gauging my reaction. He wasn't cruel, David added. He just wasn't present. And now, standing here, I'm realizing that I may have become more like him than I wanted. That sentence felt like a pin dropping in a cathedral. Clara sat rigid in her seat. The girls looked up for the first time. And me? I just sat there. Still. Like a statue carved out of confusion. David ended his speech with, "I hope he's at peace now. And I hope we all remember the good parts." He stepped down. Sat next to Clara, who reached for his hand but didn't find it. I didn't hear the rest of the service. It went on, but I wasn't there for it. Not really. My mind was replaying David's words, over and over, like a scratched record. What did he mean? That James was distant? That I protected him from his father? That he became his father? I needed air. I slipped out the side door during the final hymn, walked down the church steps, and into the grass. The sun hit my face, but I felt cold. Colder than I'd felt in days. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow. Hesitant. It was David. "Mom," he said. "Wait." I turned around but said nothing. He stood a few feet away, eyes soft. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to be honest." "About your father?" I asked. He hesitated. "About everything." David took a step closer. Not too close, just enough to show he wanted to bridge a gap, but wasn't sure if he was allowed to. "I've been carrying it for a while," he said. "This weird mix of guilt and confusion. I don't know how to explain it right." I looked at him, standing there in his polished shoes and perfectly knotted tie, and for a moment I didn't see the man he'd become. I saw the boy who used to sneak Oreos before dinner, who used to fall asleep in his father's lap during late-night TV shows, even if he remembered it differently now. "Then just say it plain," I replied. "You always used to say things plain." He ran his hand over his face. "All right. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I didn't know how I was supposed to feel about Dad. I mean, I loved him. I did. But I always felt like I had to earn his attention. Like if I didn't do something impressive, I'd be invisible. I stayed quiet. That silence wasn't just grief anymore, it was heavy with a truth I hadn't been prepared to hear today. Not from my own son. Not like this. You were always there, he added. You did everything. You covered for him. You softened him. I looked away. Because he worked hard, David. He worked hard for us. For you. I know, he said, not unkindly. But it didn't always feel like it was for me. It felt like he worked to escape things. And sometimes, it felt like he escaped us. That one stung. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, with 50 years of memories rushing past me like wind. All those nights James came home late, all the birthday parties he nearly missed, the awkward silences at the dinner table. I had defended them in my mind. Rationalized them. Wrapped them up in bows of sacrifice and duty. Was it all just an excuse? Do you resent me? I asked, finally. David looked shocked. What? No. God, no, Mom. You were the glue. You were everything. I guess I resented that we never talked about it. That we pretended everything was okay. He sat down on the small stone wall next to the church garden, the same one James used to lean against when waiting for me after Sunday choir practice. I think when I left for college, I told myself I was starting over. That I'd be different from him. But then I got busy. I buried myself in work. I stopped coming around as much. Clara, well, she never really connected with you, and I didn't push it. I should have. I should have made the time. I sat down beside him. The grass was freshly cut, and the scent reminded me of summer evenings and bare feet on the porch. You know, I said softly, your father loved you. He just didn't always know how to show it. David nodded. I believe that. I do. But love needs words. And time. And presence. I'm just now realizing that. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I reached over and took his hand. Not because everything was healed, but because it had begun. And that had to count for something. Later that day, after the last of the guests had gone and the house was finally quiet again, David came back. Alone this time. Clara and the girls were back at the hotel. He walked in slowly, his hand brushing against the photo board I had set near the fireplace. He lingered on one picture, James and David fishing on Lake Whitney. David was maybe 12. James had his arm around his shoulders, both of them grinning with their catch held high. I forgot about this trip, David murmured. He was so happy that day. He was proud of you, I said. He told everyone at church how you outfished him. David chuckled. I remember. He kept calling me Captain Big Mouth Bass all summer. We both smiled, and for the first time in days, it felt real. He looked around the living room, taking in the shelves of photo albums, the quilt folded neatly on the recliner, the old clock that hadn't worked in 5 years but James swore he'd fix someday. This house smells like childhood, he said quietly. It should, I replied. It held all of yours. He looked at me. Do you think he knew I had mixed feelings about him? I paused. Yes. I think he did. And I think it hurt him. But he understood. David nodded slowly. Maybe that's why he kept asking about me those last few months. I thought Clara was exaggerating. She said he left messages I never returned. He did, I said. He called almost every week. He'd say, has he called back, and I'd say, not yet. And then he'd just nod. David sat down on the couch, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't know how to make it right now that he's gone. You start by not repeating the silence, I said. He looked up. What do you mean? Don't become him, I said, gently but firmly. Don't let work be an excuse. Don't let your daughters forget what warmth feels like. And don't let your wife become a placeholder for conversations you're too tired to have. He was quiet for a moment. Then, can I come by tomorrow? Bring the girls? I smiled. The door's always open. Has been since you left. He nodded. Then maybe it's time I stop just walking in and start staying a while. When he left that night, I stood at the window again, same mug, same road, but something inside me felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or less hollow. Grief doesn't leave. It just changes shape. And maybe forgiveness is the same way. Not an erasing, but a softening. That night, I took down the photo board and set the pictures into a new album. One I hadn't labeled yet. I think I'll call it, After James. And maybe, just maybe, it'll be the beginning of something better. The next morning came quietly. No alarm. No clinking dishes from James setting out breakfast. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of morning birds. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea this time. I hadn't had tea in years. James always liked coffee, strong, black, 2 cups before speaking. So I'd gotten used to coffee. But now, with him gone, I didn't need to like what he liked. I could rediscover what I did. The knock on the door came just before 10. When I opened it, there stood David and his 2 girls, Emily, 14, and Sarah, maybe 10. I'd seen them grow up in photos, year by year, Christmas card by Christmas card, like flipping through a catalog instead of holding them in my arms. But there they were now, eyes curious, slightly nervous. Behind them, Clara stood, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Morning, Mom," David said, offering a cautious smile. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "All of you." The girls walked in slowly, as if stepping into a museum of someone else's memories. They paused to look at the framed wedding photo of James and me on the entry table. The one where I wore a borrowed veil and he had a crooked bow tie. We looked so young. So certain. Emily pointed at the picture. "Is that you?" "It is," I said. "And that's your granddad. On our wedding day." "He looks like Dad," Sarah said. I smiled. "Your dad looked just like him when he was your age. Same stubborn chin." The girls giggled softly, and David relaxed a little. "I made pancakes," I said. "Hope you're hungry." Clara stepped forward. "We actually already ate at the hotel." But before she could finish, Sarah piped up, "I'm still hungry." Clara looked mildly irritated, but I ignored it. "Well, good. I made enough for an army." We sat around the table. The girls picked at their food at first, but soon they were devouring the pancakes like they hadn't eaten in days. David ate quietly, stealing glances around the room, noticing little things. I saw him staring at the bookshelf where James's fishing hat still sat, dusty but untouched. "Mom," he said finally, "do you want help going through Dad's things?" I hesitated. It was a fair question. Logical. Thoughtful, even. But also, personal. James's things weren't just things. They were him. His scent still clung to his flannel shirts. His calligraphy pen was still tucked behind his chair. I wasn't sure if I was ready to invite someone else into that goodbye. "Not yet," I said gently. "But thank you." He nodded, and we let it be. After breakfast, the girls wandered outside to chase the cat around the yard, Max, who was older than Sarah and still not impressed by visitors. I watched them from the kitchen window, their laughter rising into the soft morning air. It was a sound I hadn't heard in this house in a long, long time. David stood beside me, hands in his pockets. "I wish we'd done this sooner," he said. I didn't respond right away. Because the truth was, so did I. But regret's a tricky thing, it clings to you if you feed it too often. "You're here now," I said instead. He turned to face me. "I meant what I said yesterday, about wanting to change things. I don't want my girls to grow up thinking love is something you only earn. I looked at him, really looked. And I saw that boy again. The one who used to line up his toy cars by color. The one who once cried because a turtle he found in the yard had wandered away before he could say goodbye. Then start with today, I said. Start with them. That afternoon, something shifted. Clara stayed on the couch, scrolling through her phone, occasionally offering a tired comment or two, but it was clear her mind was elsewhere. I didn't push. Not everyone knows how to sit with someone else's grief. But David stayed present. He helped the girls plant sunflowers in the backyard, kneeling in the dirt beside them. He asked them about school, their friends, their favorite books. And when Sarah told him she wanted to learn guitar, he promised to find her a used one by next week. And I just watched. Not like a ghost, not like someone fading into the background, but like someone witnessing a reintroduction. A quiet reunion, not of grand gestures, but of slow understanding. At one point, Sarah came up to me with dirt-smudged cheeks and said, "Grandma, can we come back next weekend?" My throat tightened. I'd like that very much. And just like that, something opened. Something small, but real. When they finally packed up to leave, the sun was starting to lean westward, casting long shadows across the living room. The girls hugged me goodbye, awkwardly, but sincerely. David lingered at the door. "Thank you," he said. "For letting us come. For everything." I placed my hand on his cheek. "You're my son, David. You don't need to thank me for coming home." He looked down, eyes glistening. "It hasn't felt like home in a long time. But today it did." I nodded. "Then let's not wait so long next time." He smiled. "We won't." When they drove off, I stood on the porch, James's old flannel wrapped around my shoulders, and watched their car disappear down the road. For the first time since the funeral, the house didn't feel empty. It felt paused. As if something was beginning again, not where it left off, but somewhere new. I sat down in the rocker, the one James had sanded and repainted every spring. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze brush my face, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I had to brace for anything. Sometimes the hardest part isn't losing someone. It's realizing what's still left behind. And what you're still capable of healing. The days after David's visit felt different, like the air had shifted, just a little, in that old house. It was as if James's spirit was still lingering somewhere in the corners, watching us, waiting to see what would happen next. I started going through some of James's things, quietly, on my own. The drawers of his desk, the closet where his worn jackets hung like soldiers standing guard. I found letters, too, letters he had written during his years in the service, and others he'd written to me when we were courting. The handwriting was rough, but the words were soft, full of hope and longing. One evening, I sat down with a box full of old photographs. There were pictures of James as a young man, standing proudly in his uniform, pictures of our wedding day, pictures of David as a baby, his chubby cheeks and bright eyes looking right into the camera. I traced my fingers over the images, memories flooding back like a sudden rain. I found a photo I hadn't seen before, a candid shot of James and David fishing, but this one was different. David was smiling. Really smiling. The kind of smile that lights up the whole face. It was a reminder that even in the hard times, there were moments of joy. The more I looked, the more I realized that James's story was more complicated than I'd ever admitted. He was a man who had loved deeply but struggled to show it. A man who had built walls around himself that no one really knew how to climb. The next time David came over, I asked if he wanted to help me sort through some of these memories. He agreed. We spent hours sifting through boxes, talking quietly about the past. Sometimes it was uncomfortable. Sometimes it was funny. But always, it was honest. David told me stories I hadn't heard before, the late-night talks he had with his father, the times James had stayed up to help with a school project, the small gestures of love that had been easy to miss. I told him about the sacrifices James had made for our family, the dreams he'd set aside to provide for us, the regrets he carried with him. It was like we were weaving together a new narrative, one that included the pain and the love, the mistakes and the forgiveness. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the window, David looked up from a photo album and said, "Maybe Dad wasn't perfect. But he was ours. And maybe that's enough." I nodded. It is. Later that night, I found myself sitting alone on the porch, the sky turning a deep shade of purple. I thought about how life is full of contradictions. The people we love can hurt us, and the people who hurt us can love us. I thought about how grief isn't just about loss, it's about learning to live again with the pieces left behind. And I thought about how, sometimes, the hardest conversations lead to the most healing. In the days that followed, David's visits became more frequent. He brought the girls over more often, too, sometimes just for a few hours, sometimes to stay the night. The house, once silent and heavy with memories, was filling with new sounds, laughter, footsteps on the hardwood floor, the clinking of dishes during breakfast. One afternoon, as I watched Emily and Sarah chase Max through the yard, I realized how much life can shift in just a short time. The girls were curious about everything, asking questions about James, about the house, about me. They weren't just polite visitors anymore, they were becoming part of the story. David and I spent long evenings talking about the past and the future. He shared stories about his work, his fears about becoming like his father, and his hopes for his daughters. I shared my memories, my regrets, and the lessons James had taught me. We weren't trying to rewrite history, but we were trying to understand it. And in doing so, we were finding a way forward. One day, David asked if I wanted to come with him to the lake where James used to fish. I agreed. The sun was bright, and the air smelled like pine and water. We sat on the dock, legs dangling over the edge, watching the ripples on the surface. David threw a fishing line into the water and smiled. Dad loved this place. Said it was where he felt most at peace. I nodded. He wanted us to feel that peace too. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. About forgiveness. About family. About the things we hadn't said. When we finally packed up to leave, I felt lighter than I had in months. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how healing often comes in small moments, a shared smile, a gentle touch, an honest conversation. And I realized that even in loss, there is hope. Because the stories we tell, and the memories we hold, can be the foundation for something new. The weeks passed, and the rhythms of life in the old house began to settle into something familiar yet new. David's visits grew into a steady presence, not just as a son mourning his father, but as a father reconnecting with his own children, and with me. One rainy afternoon, as the sky wept softly against the windows, David and I sat in the living room, surrounded by photo albums and scattered memories. The rain's gentle tapping created a quiet backdrop, perfect for the kind of conversations that had been long overdue. He pulled out a worn journal from the box, a leather-bound book James had kept for years, filled with thoughts, sketches, and poems. "Did you know about this?" David asked, flipping through the pages with reverence. I shook my head. "No. I never saw it." David smiled sadly. "Neither did I. He must have hidden it well." We spent hours reading fragments of James's inner world, lines about love and loss, hope and regret. It was a window into the man behind the quiet, the tough exterior, and the occasional distance. Reading those words felt like meeting James all over again, raw, vulnerable, and real. That night, I realized how little we truly know the people we love. How much remains hidden beneath the surface. And how powerful it is to uncover those hidden pieces. The journal became a touchstone for our healing. David and I promised to share its stories with Emily and Sarah when they were ready, to help them understand the grandfather they barely knew. At the same time, I found myself reaching out to old friends of James's, piecing together stories and memories from the past. There was the bartender at the local pub who remembered James's laughter, the neighbor who recalled his kindness during the toughest winter, the church choir director who spoke of his faith. Each story added depth to the picture we were painting, not just of a man, but of a legacy. One afternoon, David said to me, maybe Dad's story isn't just about loss. Maybe it's about tea. I nodded, feeling tears well up. I think you're right. As the seasons changed, so did we. The garden bloomed again, the walls felt warmer, and the house no longer seemed like a mausoleum of the past but a sanctuary for the future. And through it all, I held on to one truth: love is messy, complicated, and imperfect, but it's also resilient, enduring, and transformative. In the end, it's the stories we tell and the connections we nurture that shape who we are. And sometimes, what is said at a funeral is just the beginning. Spring turned into summer, and the house filled with light and warmth again. David brought the girls more often now, and sometimes Clara came along too. The tensions that had been thick at the funeral began to soften, replaced by moments of laughter and shared stories. One Saturday afternoon, as the sun streamed through the lace curtains, we gathered around the dining table with a stack of photo albums and old letters spread out before us. Emily, ever curious, flipped through a faded envelope addressed to James. "Who's this from?" she asked. "That's from a woman named Sarah," I said. "She was a close friend of your grandfather's when he was younger." David raised an eyebrow. "I don't think we ever heard that story." I smiled. "There are a lot of stories you haven't heard yet." We read the letter aloud. It was filled with words of encouragement and affection, a testament to the friendships and connections James had beyond our family. As the afternoon wore on, stories flowed, some funny, some bittersweet, all pieces of the man James was. At one point, Clara surprised me by sharing a memory of James helping her with her garden, patiently teaching her how to prune the rose bushes. "It was one of the few times I really saw him relax," she said softly. That moment broke through the quiet walls that had built up between us. Later, as the sun dipped low, David pulled me aside. "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time to do something to honor Dad." The days after the memorial were quieter, but they carried a new kind of peace. It wasn't the loud, overwhelming kind of happiness you sometimes see in movies. It was softer, like the gentle hum of the wind through the trees, the calm steady beat of a heart learning to heal. David stayed with us longer that week, and each day brought a little more understanding, a little more connection. The girls were more comfortable, asking questions, sharing their own stories, and even helping me with small chores around the house. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, Emily leaned against me and said, "Grandma, I think Dad was proud of you." I looked down at her, surprised by her insight. "Why do you say that?" "Because you kept telling his stories," she said. "Even the hard parts. That means you loved him." Her words touched something deep inside me. Love isn't about perfection, I thought. It's about truth. About holding on to the good, forgiving the bad, and still choosing to remember. That night, I took out James's journal again, flipping to a page I hadn't read before. It was a short poem, simple but powerful. Asterisk, "In shadows deep, love will find a way. Through storms and silence, come what may. Hold fast to light, though night is long. For in our hearts, we carry song." Asterisk. I read it over and over, feeling James's voice speak through the years, reminding me that love endures beyond loss. In the weeks that followed, I began writing my own stories, memories of James, reflections on grief, and lessons learned. Writing became a kind of therapy, a way to make sense of the chaos inside. David encouraged me, even suggested sharing these stories with others who might be struggling. The idea scared me at first, but deep down, I knew it was right. Because stories have power. They heal. They connect. They remind us that we are never truly alone. One afternoon, as I typed the last words of a piece about love and forgiveness, my phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "Thank you for sharing. You're stronger than you know." I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks. The journey from grief to healing isn't a straight line. It twists and turns, with setbacks and breakthroughs. But with love, honesty, and connection, it is possible to find hope again. James's story wasn't just about the pain of loss. it was about the enduring bonds that shape us, the courage to face the past, and the promise of new beginnings. And as I look toward the future, I carry that promise with me. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones that teach us how to live.